You are listening to Chthonia, the podcast of the Dark Feminine. Chthonia's logo was designed by J.R. Malpair. Background music is Phantasm by Kevin MacLeod. Hello, and welcome to Chthonia. I'm your host, Breach Burke. It's a little strange for me today because this is the first time I'm actually recording a new podcast since April. I actually been doing them in groups at this point. And one of the things I've been doing is, I did all the Mahavidyas. I tried to finish up that set together. And probably over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to try to finish up this next set, just to kind of give regular listeners an idea of what's coming up for this year. We're about to start the series on the Matrikas. Now, I'll explain what that is in a moment. But I think what we're looking at is, probably the Matrika series is going to take us through mid-October, roughly. I think I might do another podcast on the Morrigan after that. The last one I did was last October with April Shaley. That one, the sound was a little weird on that one. I know April was recording from a very strange location, so there wasn't she didn't have a normal microphone. So what we're going to do is, so I'm going to do that, and then I'll probably finish out the year with some Egyptian goddesses, some Egyptian dark mothers who we will talk about. So that's what the rest of 2020 is probably going to look like for this podcast. In the meantime, we are going to get into the subject of Matrikas. And the first Matrika we are going to talk about today is Chamunda. Okay. Now, first of all, you're probably asking, well, maybe you're not, if you're depending on how familiar you are. What is a Matrika? Okay. Now, the Matrika is actually a word that means mother. Okay, and often there's a reference to the Sapta Matrika, or 7 Matrikas, or 7 mothers. There's also a reference to the Asta Matrikas, which is the 8 mothers, and in that one, Narasimhi is also included as one of one of these particular quote unquote mother images or mother deities. And again, depending on which text you're reading, which epic, which Purana, you'll see certain different varieties. And Matrikas, what they literally are referred to as they're referred to as mothers, but they're actually extremely fearsome in their aspect. One of the discussions of them suggests that they were emblematic, as they say, of childhood pestilence, fever, starvation, and disease, and propitiated in order to avoid these ills. Now, at a more fundamental level, a Matrika is a Shakti. It is a manifestation of the Devi, of the supreme Shakti, of the power, of the feminine power of the universe. And where they're often seen. Now, the story that we're probably most familiar with the Matrikas, it's in the Kalika Puranas, and also in the Devi Mahatmayam. There's a lot of overlap between those two, and I'm actually going to read about Chamunda from the Durga Saptashati, or the Chandipat, which is from the Devi Mahatmayam. There's a chapter in there. Actually, it's chapter 7, interestingly. That talks about Chamunda and what the story is that most people associate with Chamunda. And what we see these Matrikas doing is they often seem to have a protective function. Remember, my earlier podcasts, we had talked about the idea of the terrible mother. We talk about the devouring terrible mother, which definitely applies here, but also as the mother, who in that role is protective. One thing about, I think, these really scary-looking goddesses is that, especially if you're female, you have this idea that, these goddesses, protect you from stuff. I mean, they're not fooling around. And I can tell you that Chamunda, in particular, is a goddess that you don't fool around with. Let me sort of make a start here. I want to talk a little bit about her specifically. I do also want to say, though, that the Matrikas are also associated with a group of goddesses called Yoginis. Now, the Yoginis are sometimes considered to be the daughters of the Matrikas, so it's weird that you could have Matrikas and Yoginis that are the same, but they also may just be other manifestations of the Devi, like another version of the Shakti, because there you have okay, if we go with the system that says that there's 8 Matrikas, then generally with those is multiplied by 8, you have 64 Yoginis, okay? So it's like each of them, it's like, for each one of them there's like 7 more. So that which makes a total of 8 for each, and then that's 64. And that tends to be associated with the Yoginis who are reside in the Sri Chakra, or the home of the Devi, as it were. So the Yoginis are another. I mean, the term Yogini is used for other things too. It can be used for a female tantric practitioner. It can be used for a female yogi. The term is used in a lot of different cases and in a lot of different ways. But a lot of times now the other thing too. Now, if you remember from our discussion of the Mahavidyas, there's the independence factor when it comes to the Matrikas. Now, some of the Matrikas are considered to be the Shakti or power of male divinities. Okay, so there's for example, Komari, who we'll talk about in the next podcast, is considered to be the Shakti of Komara or Skanda, who is the god of war. Okay. There's the Matrikas who are considered to be the Shaktis of like Vishnu or Brahma or some of these other deities. Now, the one we're talking about today, Chamunda, is in fact the only Matrika who is the Shakti of the great goddess Devi herself. She has no male counterpart whatsoever. The other thing worth knowing about Chamunda is that Chamunda is like her and like a lot of the Matrikas, they're very, very old. Okay, they have a tradition in the Vedas. They get picked up by the Brahmanic traditions. Okay, and the sort of proper Hindu worship as we know it. However, all of them seem to have origins that are much, much older. Whether it be in certain local deities. You kind of see this in Greece too. When you talk about Mount Olympus, and you talk about like Zeus, for example, and Zeus and Artemis and Hera and Aphrodite, all these goddesses, they sort of end up taking on attributes of other local deities that are there. They might be referred to as, like for example, chthonic deities might be known as Zeus Chthonios, or something like that. There's the quote-unquote main state deities, if you will, end up kind of subsuming the local deities that are there, and I believe a lot of this has happened with the Matrikas. Now, Chamunda is interesting because she's kind of retained her identity, and she is very demonic appearing in nature, certainly. And I'm also thinking of some of these other, like when we talk about Indri or Indrani, the queen of the gods. She's like the Hera of the Hindu pantheon. She is actually the daughter of a demon as well. So you have these Matrikas that are these Shakta, but they're not these kind of pure. This is not new to anybody who's familiar with this podcast, but one of the things we want to get away from, is the whole good versus evil theme. And they're not really anything. They're powers that can be protective and that can be helpful and that can vanquish demons, but they can also be somewhat demonic in and of themselves. And again, the term demonic in Hinduism means something rather different. This is kind of why they have a tantric association, because tantra, if you say tantra is about the demonic, I mean, that immediately to a Westerner, the narrative there, it signals something very, very, bad or evil or something like that. That's not what we mean by demonic. Demonic tends to have to do with that which is Ashuric, or doing with the Ashuras. So it has to do with things that are, how can I put it, having to do with goals that are perhaps more material than spiritual. And again, you want to avoid making a distinction between material is bad and spiritual is good. That happens a lot too. if anything, Tantra teaches us that both are necessary, that, to live a balanced life, you should participate in and enjoy the world, and, there's a time and place also for spiritual aspiration. So, it's not a matter of choosing one over the other. We may choose our behaviors, what constitutes right action or right behavior in a particular situation, but there's not, there's not a, there's not this rigid line between what's sinful and what's not sinful. There are certain traditions that focus heavily on purity or on purifications or getting rid of pollutions. But what we have here is we have goddesses that function in a very polluted kind of a fashion, just the way that many of the Mahavidyas do. So you're going to see this same element with the Matrikas, but the Matrikas are definitely they are definitely more the essence of these of the divine. And as we see, the essence of the divine is not necessarily, quote unquote, all good. In fact, each Matrika is associated with a vice. Okay, and that vice can depend. It can be wrath, it can be anger, it can be greed, it can be jealousy, and we'll talk about each individual one when we go into each individual matrika. But, just as they embody those qualities or their manifestations of those qualities, they can also help the devotee to, learn about those qualities in themselves. This is also, again, just kind of drawing parallels with the West here. If people who practice a Goetic practice, and when I say Goetia, when I talk about the West, I realize that that means more than one thing also. There's certainly the practice of using the grimoires, and, there's some overlap here, but there's the later grimoires that come out, like, throughout the Middle Ages and beyond. And then there's the tradition that, the archaic Goetia, which has to do with sort of practices that were done in ancient Greece, kind of necromantic practices. But either way, Goetia, when one works with demons, okay, when one does that, takes the Goetia and says, okay, I'm going to, draw, circle on the floor, and I'm going to put a sigil in, and I'm going to, call up this demon, and I'm going to ask it to do something. I'm going to make ask it to do something for me. When that happens, it's kind of like, it's a very, okay, what tends to happen is the thing, I think Lon Milo Duquette expressed this the best in his book Low Magic, and also I had gone to a workshop that he did many years ago on Goetia. And I thought that one of the things he said that was very good was he had said, when you try to summon a spirit like that for something, it generally generally shows something that you're lacking. So, for example, in the example he gives of himself, he will say that, okay, that was a time when, I don't know, he was a musician, he was having trouble making money, he had a family, he had his wife and his son, he couldn't support them, so he felt like, he wasn't doing his job as the father of the family and so forth. So he ended up looking to a demon to help him that had to do with dignity, okay? Restoring his dignity. And so he says, but really for him to say, I need a demon to restore my dignity implies that I don't feel I have dignity. Just like he said, if somebody wants to perform, say, a love spell or invoke something to say, I want Susie next door to fall in love with me, as he put it, then that means I don't think I'm the kind of person that Susie would be interested in. So it's that kind of a thing. My point is that oftentimes they can help point out areas that are in shadow for you or areas where you lack. Okay. So if you appeal to a matrika who has to do with jealousy, for example, then then that could mean that jealousy is a problem for you, that you're very possessive, that you're that you can't let go of certain things, or you have attachments to certain things. So just as a way of example. Okay, so this is a very long preface, but I feel like it's important to explain what the matrikas are and their role as we're going to get into this series talking about them individually. So now we are going to move on to Chamunda. Now Chamunda is okay. Let me describe how she appears here. And okay, so I'll read a little bit of a description of her. The black or red-colored Chamunda is described as wearing a garland of severed heads or skulls. She's described as having 4, 8, 10, or 12 arms, holding a damaru or drum, a trishula, a trident, a sword, a snake, a skull mace, a thunderbolt, a severed head, and a panapatra, which is a drinking vessel or a wine cup, or a skull, or sometimes she has a skull cup filled with blood, standing on the corpse of a man, or seated on a defeated demon or corpse. Okay, so this is how she is portrayed. Chamunda is depicted adorned by ornaments of bones, skulls, and serpents. She also wears a Jnanopavita, a sacred thread worn mostly by Hindu priests, of skulls. She wears a Jata Mukuta, that is a headdress formed of piled, matted hair tied with snakes or skull ornaments. Sometimes a crescent moon is seen on her head. Her eye sockets are described as burning the world with flames. She is accompanied by evil spirits. She is also shown to be surrounded by skeletons or ghosts and beasts like jackals, who are shown eating the flesh of the corpse which the goddess sits or stands on. The jackals and her fearsome companions are sometimes depicted as drinking blood from the skull cup or blood dripping from the severed head, implying that Chamunda drinks the blood of the defeated enemies. The quality of drinking blood is usually a characteristic of all Matrikas, and Chamunda in particular. At times she is depicted seated on an owl, her vahana, mount or vehicle. Her banner figures an eagle. Okay. So, as we can see, she is very scary-looking goddess. It's interesting that there's not a whole lot of artwork of Chamunda that I have seen. Or the artwork I've seen of her has made her a little bit more like Kali. And sometimes she is actually conflated with Kali, just like you see that with Tara and with some of these others. And to a certain degree, yes, there's definitely an overlap in qualities and energy between these goddesses. Now, the main story surrounding Chamunda, as I said, comes from the Chandipat, also known as the Durga Saptashati, 700 verses in praise of Durga, which is a piece that comes from a larger epic known as the Devi Mahatmayam. Okay, and I did do a podcast on the Devi Mahatmayam a few months ago now, actually. So let's start. I actually have my copy of the Chandipat here, and it's the one translated by Swami Satyananda Saraswati. And so I'm going to read the translation. Now, in this translation, Chamunda is referred to as the, let me find how they say it here, the remover of darkness. Okay, so that is how she is translated here. So when you hear remover of darkness, we are talking about Chamunda. Okay. And the chapter starts with a meditation upon Matangi, okay, as we know, who is one of the Mahavidyas associated with pollution. So interesting that that's the introduction to the Chamunda chapter. Okay, so here we have this battle. This is the section, and I've talked about this before, so I don't want to rerun through the whole story. But this is when the Asuras, the great ego, and all of the bad qualities, as you could say, have taken over the world. Okay, they've taken over. And, so the gods, of course, appeal to the Devi to destroy them. I'm going to make one quick side note here that's important. One of the things I have noticed in reading a lot of stories about Asuras, or demons, who practice austerities and certain purifications and spiritual practices in order to achieve a boon. See, their purpose is to achieve something, okay? It's not to achieve necessarily knowledge or, what we might think of in our terms as improvement. They're generally trying to get something. They're trying to get power for themselves of some kind. And when they do this, I've noticed that when they request a boon from Brahma or from Shiva or from any of these gods for what they do, sometimes they try to request immortality, and they're told, you can't have that. You can have something else. You can't have that. Often what they want, and this isn't true in all cases, but it's true in a lot of cases, probably most of them, is that they want to be invincible. They want it so that no man can kill them. Okay? Now, this is important, that no man can kill them. Okay? Which means that a woman could kill them. Okay? So this is, if you wonder why the Devi is frequently called up, a lot of times you have demons that are invincible to any kind of male deity or whoever that can't be vanquished. It requires a woman, and there's kind of an almost patriarchal arrogance there. It's just kind of like, yeah, well, I don't need to mention women because what's a woman gonna do? I mean, she's not gonna defeat me, right? Well, as they find, that's because women, are always portrayed as like always sweetness and light, and they're not gonna do anything. Well, as we find out, that's not true. So, okay. So I'm going to read this translation of this chapter because this has to do directly with where we get sort of the Brahmin idea of Chamunda. Okay? In adherence to the command of self-conceit, passion and anger set forth with 4 divisions of their army of thoughts, well adorned with weapons and armor. On a high peak in the Golden Mountains, they saw the goddess sitting on her lion, smiling with delight. Seeing her, the thoughts made ready to capture her. Some took up their bows, some raised their swords, some collected around the goddess to begin the fight. Then the mother of the universe became very angry with those attackers, and her face turned dark with rage. The eyebrows were scowling, and from her frowning forehead appeared the remover of darkness, with a terribly frightening face, who was holding a sword and a net in her hands. She wore a leopard-skin garment and a garland of human skulls. Her flesh had withered, and she appeared as a skeleton of bones and very fierce. She displayed fantastic missiles of consciousness. Her mouth was immense, and she brandished her tongue as a sword that caused great fear. Her eyes were penetrating and somewhat red, and her fearful roar was humming in all directions. The remover of darkness killed many great thoughts, and after destroying an army of thoughts in great haste, she began to eat them all. She picked up elephants with one hand and put them into her mouth together with their protectors, the driver with his goads, soldiers, and bells. In the same way, she took warriors, horses, chariots with their charioteers, the entire cavalry of thoughts. She put them into her mouth and hideously began to chew. Some thoughts she grabbed by the hair, others she crushed at the throat, still others she trampled with her feet, and others she killed by a stroke to the breast. She picked up the great weapons of that army in her mouth, and in fearful anger she ground them with her teeth. She trampled that entire army of mighty and wicked thoughts and ate them all, and others she fiercely beat. Some fell by the blade of her sword, some were beaten by the missiles of consciousness, and some were crushed to death by her formidable teeth. In this way, that entire mighty army of thoughts was killed in a moment. Seeing this, passion attacked that excessively fearful remover of darkness. Also that great thought, anger, raised his extremely terrible arrows and hurled 1,000 discuses against the fearful-eyed goddess. Those discuses entered her mouth, shone as a halo of light of the sun absorbed in many clouds. Then with a fearful roar, the remover of darkness laughed furiously, her teeth radiantly gleaming in her fierce mouth. Then the goddess, mounting upon the lion, seized Passion by the hair, and with a broadsword she cut off his head. Seeing the death of Passion, anger attacked the goddess. Then in terrible anger, stabbing him with her sword, she laid him to rest on the ground. The remaining army, seeing the death of the terribly valiant Passion and Anger, were overcome with fear and ran away. Thereafter, the remover of darkness took the heads of Passion and Anger in her hands and brought them to she who tears apart thought, and spoke to her with a great laugh. I present to you 2 great beasts, Passion and Anger. Now in the war of sacrifice, you yourself will kill self-conceit and self-depreciation. Then the Rishi says, seeing the heads of the 2 great thoughts, Passion and Anger, Chanda and Munda, brought there, the goddess of welfare, she who tears apart thought, said in sweet words to the remover of darkness, since you have brought me the heads of Passion and Anger, henceforth you will be known in all the worlds as the slayer of Passion and Anger, Chamundeti. Okay? Okay. Okay, so this is the traditional idea. Now, first she kind of starts out as almost a Kali-like manifestation. She's this emaciated skeletal figure wearing a tiger skin. Tiger skin, as we know, represents the ability to control desire. So as ferocious as she is and as enraged as she is, it's a sign that she really does have it under control in spite of how things might appear. But she almost has almost like a function of a black hole. She just swallows everything up. And there is a similarity to Kali there, because if Kali is the devourer of time, it's the idea, or we also think back to Greek mythology with Kronos, swallowing his children. There's this idea of the devourer, and it always seems to be a deity associated with time that is a devourer. But here we see her, excuse me, having to do with passion and anger. Okay, she is devouring. The deities having to do with, the way in which we act hastily or we act from motives. It's when our, emotions are important, but when our emotions get out of control, like any of the Asuras, I mean, the Asuras by themselves, they represent just qualities. We don't want to say that they're good or evil. But what frequently happens is those qualities get out of control. So when we have passion and anger, we have, excessive force. We have, actions not only that are irrational, but are just, how can I put it? They're not just irrational actions. They're, they're just, they're certainly not the appropriate actions for those situations. They could be overreactions. So here we see the role of these kinds of terrible, ferocious mothers as those that kind of still the passions. That's kind of like, okay, let's slap you in the head a few times and get you back in control of yourself. The deities that shake you and go, all right, get a grip. Here's the reality. This is it. You have to deal with this. And it can kind of be in your face like that. So, so we see this role of Chamunda, and when she's generally propitiated in temples or brought up in prayers or in bhajans or things like that, she's generally brought up in the same breath as Kali, and she is also considered to be, this kind of this demon slayer, this demon devourer. Okay, now, having said that, I'm looking at the book, and I did a review of this book on the Chthonia blog, so do check that out. This is from Theon Press. It's a book called Ferocious that actually gets into all of the aspects of the Matrikas. Okay, and it actually, even though it's dealing with the Sapta Matrikas, it does deal with all 8. Narasimi is put in the appendix there. And one of the things that they note is they said Chamunda looks demonic, and she is demonic. Okay. One thing you have to think about is when you have a deity that continually drinks the blood of demons, that the idea is that drinking of blood gives you the qualities of that which you are drinking, okay? Which, that which held the blood, okay? That's more, the way I want to say that. So she is, she doesn't, but the kind of energy that she has can be very, very easily offended. Is very volatile, and you don't want to approach that energy, frivolously or flippantly. People who are magicians who maybe appeal to the Matrikas for assistance. Now, Chamunda is one of those that you don't, if you're angry at somebody, you don't want to send Chamunda after them unless you've got somebody who's really like, murdering your family and trying to destroy your house. I mean, I would not, unless it's an extreme case, I would not if you happen to practice those kind of things, I would not recommend invoking Chamunda unless you're really, really serious. Because, because Chamunda, if you offend her, that can backfire on you too. But she's not just likely to, bring the person you don't like bad luck. She's probably going to burn their freaking house down. So it's a very, very powerful Shakti energy. And one of the things that's made very clear about Chamunda is that in spite of the story I just read to you, she is very clearly pre-Vedic. She is very clearly a very, very old deity that has been around for a long time. And what's interesting is that the sort of egalitarian nature of her, in the same way that you see with gods like, say, Bacchus or Dionysus, where the very powerful and the very wealthy, and in this case the very high caste, worship Chamunda, but also the very lowest, the untouchables, and the people who are classes of thugs and criminals and, the poverty-stricken, they also appeal to Chamunda. Chamunda is a very, very democratic goddess. I mean, she is not... just for one. And as they imply in the Ferocious book, they said, she probably would not be around this long or propitiated if the rites to her did not actually yield some kind of result. So she definitely represents an extremely powerful natural force, a force in the universe that exists. And yes, they're always kind of brought into these stories, and the idea is that you are... To bring Chamunda in and make her a demon slayer, it's a way of kind of taking that very, very raw and powerful and dangerous energy and kind of directing it towards, a different purpose or a different idea. Now, the other story about that I'm not going to read to you right now, but I'll just tell you about within the same Durga Saptashati about Chamunda is that she drinks the blood of Rakta Bija or Rakta Vera. Now, Rakta Bija is a demon who is like a demon of addiction. The idea is that his boon is that when you kill him, another one of him, fully grown and fully armored, appears. Okay. So Rakta Bija is like this. It literally means the name literally means seed of desire. Okay, and the idea is it's the more you try to get rid of something, the more it multiplies. So if you think the way that they often describe it is like, okay, if you're on a diet and you're somebody, I don't know, trying to diet by like living on like lettuce and water or something. And then eventually your desire just wells up and you go in and eat everything in sight in the refrigerator. Just as an example. It's like when you're trying to abstain or try to get away from it, it just makes you want it that much more. Okay, that would be the psychological kind of equivalent of that. And obviously there's a whole spectrum of responses there. But so what ends up happening is Chamunda, and again, sometimes conflated with Kali here, she runs her tongue along the ground. And when she does so, she drinks up the blood of Rakta Bija so that he cannot replicate. So here's a goddess who frees you from delusion, who frees you from passion, anger, and also from addiction. Okay, so so you have this very, very powerful and potent energy. At the same time, again, she's frequently invoked against enemies and in sort of these kinds of, which you might call black magical contexts. So she, to me, is kind of, she's sometimes considered the first of the Matrikas, and you can see that, and I don't know whether that has to do with age, whether that just has to do with her role, but she is definitely, and like Dhumavati, by the way, she's also associated with old age and disease at times. So again, these are forces that are very fearsome, but they are here. They are natural forces. Now, just a little bit more background here. Ramakrishna Gopal Bandakar, which I think I took this from I took it from a source on the web, possibly Wikipedia. But I don't think it was actually, it was probably another one of the Vedic sites that I found. There's so many of them out there, I start to lose track of what they are. He says that Chamunda was originally a tribal goddess worshipped by the tribals of the Vindhya mountains in central India. These tribes were known to offer goddesses animal as well as human sacrifices along with ritual offerings of liquor. And that's the other thing, too, about the Matrikas, by the way, is that they all like blood. You don't have to show devotion in that way, but if you are actually going to have that kind of relationship, they do like blood. Generally yours. So just not that that's required if you want to recite these goddesses' mantras or show a devotion to them. You don't have to do that. But if you're forming, my guru had only said, or at least her swamis had only said, you don't want to do that. At least is what they're telling us. They said, because then unless you're creating a very, very specific kind of a bond when you use blood. So unless you're prepared to continually maintain that bond, be careful about doing that. Okay, and it's one of those things that I wouldn't tell anybody what to do or not to do, but all I'm saying is there are people who balk at the idea of that. I'm saying it's not necessary for just straight up certain kinds of devotions. So anyway. Okay, these methods of worship were, and they also had ritual offerings of liquor. Okay, these methods of worship were retained in tantric worship of Chamunda after assimilation into Hinduism. He proposes the fierce nature of this goddess is due to her associated with Vedic Ruja, identified as Shiva in modern Hinduism, identified with the fire god Agni at times. Wangu also backs the theory of the tribal origins of the goddess. Apart from her popular names like Chamunda, Chamundi, Chamundeshwari, Chartika, and Rakta Kali, she is also known as Rudira Kali, Chanda Kali, Rudira Mala Devi, Rudirama, Rudireshwari, Rakteshwari, Rakta Chamundi, Vir Kali, Porkali, Galurika, Ugra Chandi, Kalari Devi, and Atibaya Kali regionally in India and Nepal. She is popularly worshipped as a goddess of war and patron of martial arts, like Kalari Payatu. Okay. So, so she definitely has these very intense associations, shall we say. And as they say, she is obviously originally a tribal deity that important enough to make her way into Hinduism. Now, some of the aspects I have here in my notes, that she's a demon slayer and a demoness. Like some of the darker Mahavidyas and the Santa Muerte in the Mexican tradition, she tends to be worshipped by outcasts and criminals with nothing to lose. Frequently invoked in curse magic, black magic, and as I've said, be careful about invoking her for such things. Now, personally, okay, I'm just going to make a personal side note in my own sort of relationship with Chamunda, because she is one of the deities that I favor very heavily. And it's interesting because I look at the images of her, which are meant to absolutely scare the pants off of you, but they actually don't scare me at all. I'm actually just, there's something very sublimely beautiful about looking at Chamunda. There's a tremendous beauty, at least in my eyes. She's a tremendously beautiful goddess. I mean, you know, just because she's not sitting there, you know, with a smile and looking nice or whatever, there's just something about her that to me that is just, I don't know. If I meditate on Chamunda, there's just kind of like a sublime beauty there. And I feel like when I'm, I have a lot of, those of you who are astrologically inclined, I have a tremendous amount of Mars energy in my chart. So when I'm feeling that energy at very high peaks at different times, I find Chamunda is kind of a great source of, I don't know if the comfort's the right word, but I find, I find her to be kind of a balancing or a helpful force, shall we say. Okay. Now, I was also looking at some of her other aspects. Okay, she's got an emaciated body, okay, which again, and again, she's swallowing all these things, but she never stops being emaciated, okay? She just continually, it's like her body is infinite, okay? And the emaciation may represent old age and disease and death, so again, as I said earlier, she's a kind of black hole. She's like a void beyond time and space that eventually devours everything. Makes me kind of wonder, now that I'm thinking about this and reflecting on it, whether or not, there's a lot in the Vedas and other things that kind of reflect actual things that we've learned about the universe and about how it works, particularly with regard to things like, maybe multiverses or, other certain quantum things. I'm not, that maybe at some point that could be a separate podcast. Right now I'm not, I'm not prepared to give you all the quotations there. But there's a lot in, especially the early Vedic mythology, that seems to accurately reflect what science has discovered about the universe. Joseph Campbell has a lecture series on that, where he says that's one of the reasons that people seem to be drawn to Eastern belief is because it actually jives with the factual knowledge that we've gotten to some degree. Not that myths have to be about facts, and that's not their intention necessarily, but it's easier to, adopt a narrative if we find that it matches what we've actually learned, okay? When we have a story and it's very clearly not like that's the problem with the Adam and Eve story. The world was clearly not created 5,000-6,000 years ago. So it's like, okay, if you're going to try to look at it from that angle, now does the Adam and Eve story have a value and have a meaning that doesn't have anything to do with that? Yes. But it's like when people who try to reconcile it in that way, it doesn't really work. Okay? So you'll find that. So I don't know. So now in reflection, I'm thinking, okay, is Chamunda kind of like the representation of the black hole? I mean, our galaxy is supposed to have a black hole at the center. I mean, if they're at the center of the universe, that's interesting. Is that devouring force at the center of the universe? So I don't know. I mean, hasn't been studied by scholarship, but interesting thing to think about. Let's see. I mentioned her tiger skin, her control over desires, drinking blood. Again, those are considered polluted in traditional Hinduism, just like eating meat. But she can continue, again, to take in these things. And we say she's not affected, but, if she's already of that essence, then no, it's not going to change her from being a beneficent goddess to being a nasty one or something like that. I mean, she's already got kind of the, I would say the dual aspects, because even though she is very, sort of has these proclivities that are very frightening, I still would not portray her as sort of this entirely evil goddess. I don't feel that, I don't feel that it's that simple of a distinction. Yeah, she has, again, like a lot of the Mahavidyas did, and especially the ones who were closer to Kali in nature, she is associated with graveyards and cremation grounds. And there's also this sort of liminal aspect to her, because she appeals to Brahmins and to lower castes alike, okay? And she's in Orthodox Hinduism, and she's in Tantra, okay? So that's a very powerful and pervasive energy. I mean, you don't always see that. A lot of times, especially the Matrikas, a lot of times they're worshipped as a group and not necessarily as individual deities, but Chamunda has her own temples, okay? And she has worn the test of time. She has been around a very, very long time. And again, there's her independence. She acts, even though she may be acting in concert with other deities, she basically is very much in her own right. She has no male attachments whatsoever. Okay. And again, this is remarkable for someone who is considered to be associated almost entirely with inauspicious things. Now, I have another note here about the Kshatriyas, I don't know if I'm saying that right, Kshatriyas, and the Jainist community often worship Chamunda as a Kula Devi or family deity. And also in, different, the Chapa dynasty worshipped her as a Kula Devi, the Gujar Kshatriyas, it's the KS that's throwing me here, worship her as a Kula Devi, and she has temples in Sinugra and Chandia. Okay. And a lot of this is in South India, so she definitely tends to have a very, very strong presence in South India. I had another note about her, so let me just see what I wanted to say here. Let's see. So something. Okay. I think I just had another note here. This is from Ferocious. I remember I had certain pages that had stood out to me. And this is on the idea of the ancient nature of Chamunda. It says, this theme of a deity that embodies dark or negative tendencies applies to Chamunda, but also applies to Matrika group of goddesses, which she belongs. It is also important to note that Chamunda and or Kali began as marginalized deities that gradually came to take more and more power and social prestige over the centuries. This text is also interesting to our study because it explores how different deities with similar attributes come to be associated and eventually understood to be non-different or the same entity altogether. Okay. Additionally, we know with certainty that the origins of Chamunda are very early. In terms of material evidence, Chamunda's cult is attested to by an inscription found at Gangadhar in Rajasthan. This inscription provides evidence that A. Chamunda was already considered an established deity by the 5th century, B. Chamunda was connected by them with the Matrikas and the Dakinis, which are another type of yogini-type energy. They're calling them sinister female energies, but yes, Dakinis tend to be associated with these tantric goddesses. And C. Chamunda was equated with tantric and esoteric practices and was able to fulfill all wishes. Thus, we have a deity that is clearly associated with corpses and Dakinis, both of which are polluting and polluted, and yet is also a source of wish fulfillment and magical power. That people were willing to risk approaching such an entity is evidence that Chamunda was indeed able to fulfill the wishes of her devotees, as they were clearly less threatening goddesses to approach. Okay. So it's rather interesting discussion here of Chamunda. So I think that's most of what I want to say about Chamunda for today. I have no idea how long I've got. I never do when I start doing these podcasts. They just everything just kind of goes, and I always look at what I have and I go, oh, do I really have enough material to talk about this person? And then it turns out I've been talking for like an hour and a half or something. So I'll probably stop here because I think I've actually covered all of the aspects that I think are important with regard to Chamunda. I don't say a lot of these things to steer people away from her who have an interest in this kind of a deity, because I do feel like, and again, this could just be, as I said early on in my intros to Tantra, those podcasts, is that I tend to already feel a connection with these deities. So it's not, I don't necessarily think, I'm not sure that she's for everybody, I guess is what I'm saying. And I wouldn't be frivolous about how I approach her, but by the same token, if you feel a strong devotion to her, I mean, to me, she is, again, it's kind of like what's been said about Kali. This something that seems to be so apparently awful, actually represents a kind of sublime reality and reminds us of the place of evil in the world. Now, that's kind of a hard thing to talk about right now, because everything is up in upheaval. Everything is so upset, and everybody's in chaos in the world, and we are wondering when these kinds of things are finally going to settle down or come to an end. But the upheavals, of course, are necessary if you want to make substantive changes. And it kind of makes you reconsider your ideas about, what we regard as inauspicious, okay, and what we regard as, evil, or as something to be, avoided at all costs, or vanquished, or exorcised, or gotten rid of. Not everything is the way it appears. The kind of central reality there, when you have deities that are taking away, okay, in their function, these are deities that can offer worldly wish fulfillment. At the same time, they represent, in another context, they represent sort of that removal of things that keep you from seeing how things are, that make you delude yourself, and that make you perhaps act in ways that you later regret. They allow you to free yourself from that, so that you can act in a way that's completely in accordance with who you are. And what I'm saying is that doesn't mean that there aren't times when you shouldn't be angry, or aren't times when you shouldn't display this kind of passion or whatever, that these things might not be appropriate at certain instances. But by the same token, it's it's a force that you want to keep in balance. It's not something that you want to exclude. You want to see where it fits in, and these kinds of deities can force you to confront that. And it's but I would say use those energies with care. Okay, so having said that, I'm just going to make a really brief plug here, and then I'm going to, call it a podcast. First of all, I just want to say thanks again to my patrons on Patreon. I have a small but dedicated group right now, and if I actually would like it if you enjoy the work that I do. I do a lot more than the podcast. I have, like I said, the Chthonia.net webpage has been completely redone this summer. I've added things. I have a new book publishing company called Chthonia Books. Really, it's an imprint of the Ingram distributor. And the first book out is called Maeve, which is spelled M-E-D-B. It's an Irish name, of course. And some people said, why did you have to pick the hardest spelling of the name? I'm like, yeah, but it's the only one that comes up on Amazon underneath that title. So there are some advantages. But that was the name. So I have that novella that's come out. I am finishing up one on the Morrigan. I originally had a whole outline on Chthonia.net, but I've taken a lot of it down because in the last few weeks I've had a complete revisioning of the whole project. So, and like I said, in this past week alone, I've written 51,000 words. So I'm really trucking along on this, and I'm hoping that I will have a reasonably good version, certainly by August, and I'm hoping by this fall that will be the next release of Chthonia Books. But Chthonia Books also, I am also taking submissions from other people. I've kind of done a soft launch of it for this summer because I've also been increasing my Reiki practice, increasing my tarot practice. I probably do owe people another liminal tarot video. I just haven't, I've had all kinds of tech problems this summer too. That's another issue. Even without Mercury retrograde, I've had a lot of tech issues. So, so I'm still fumbling my way through those, I guess you might say. But there's a lot going on, so if you want to support me on Patreon, I'd be most grateful. If not, just at least like what I'm doing on social media. Check it out, share it with your friends if you like it. And hopefully, we'll have, I'll be seeing more of you. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel or to the podcast if you really like this podcast. And I want to say thanks. I've had a pretty big influx in subscribers in the last couple of months. So I want to say thank you to all of you as well. And with that, I think I'll end on that note. And hope to see you all again, or I hope you all will tune in again in the near future. And be well.